So creativity helps to make the story funny and meaningful. And those are a couple of ways that being creative can help you to make a story better as you tell it. More broadly, when you communicate, and communicate in any way at all, where does creativity come in handy? Or where is creativity useful? Yeah. I'll give you a couple I came up with. One is, anytime you need to persuade about anything. So, in the communication field, some people take their communication degree and they work in advertising. And if you make advertisements, you have to be creative. Some people go and they work in public relations. And if they're going to do a public relations campaign, you have to have some creativity. And some people, they go to law school, they become lawyers, they need to persuade a jury, they need creative ways to do it. Some people go into politics, they need to persuade voters. They need creativity for their campaign advertisements. Persuasion almost always requires creativity.
Okay.
So that's one.
So, if I tell someone the way to go somewhere.
Okay, directions.
Directions.
Very good. And I would go further to say teaching people anything. Because when you teach people, for any idea that you try to explain to somebody, there are lots and lots of ways to illustrate it. There are lots of examples. And a creative person can come up with really unique ones that people will remember. And can pick ones that are really specific to their student. So their student will say, okay, I get that. That takes creativity. I'm going to add another one, which is problem solving. Whenever people talk to one another and are trying to solve a problem, simple problems get taken care of right away. So if I have the problem that my head itches, now I no longer have that problem. But complicated problems, we have to get creative and we have to think up things we haven't tried before. Can you think of anything else?
For telling history.
Pretty good. History. Tell me more about it.
If we talk about the old things, we have to talk, give an example in this world.
Right.
So,
taking history and finding how it is meaningful today takes creativity. I love it. And I will add one more, and then I think we've done a good job. Relationships. And these could be romantic relationships, or they could be friendships, or they could be family relationships. Relationships hit difficulty when people get bored with one another, when they've done the same thing over and over again. And when you can get creative and do new things you haven't done before, or sometimes you and the person you're in a relationship with, a friend or a dating partner, have a conflict. And you have to solve the problem, and you have to get creative to figure out how. So, creativity is a very, very useful thing to have if you want to be an effective communicator. And creativity is something that's really been studied extensively, so I'm going to quick give you a definition, and then I'm going to tell you a little bit about how it's measured. Definition of creativity: the ability to generate new ideas that are often useful. The ability to generate new ideas that are often useful. And in the study of creativity, the dominant way of thinking about it is to measure something called Should have put this on the slides. It would have made my life easier. Divergent thinking. Have you ever, as part of a class, or maybe as part of a club or at your workplace, had a brainstorming session? Does that sound familiar?
Yes.
Okay. Brainstorming, if you've done it before, you know what divergent thinking is, because it's come up with as many examples as possible, and ideally they should be different from one another. And when you've got a lot of examples, then you look back and say, this one's the best. But it's important to start with lots of possibilities, even if at first they seem silly. In the brainstorming, you just throw out every idea, and that's divergent thinking. And there is a standard test that's given to people to score how creative they are. It is called the Torrance test. The Torrance test. And now I'm going to show you some of the items that are on the Torrance test of creativity. One of the things they do is, if you were to take right now the Torrance test, they would give you shapes. And they would then say, for the circle, they might say, draw something and use the circle. You can use it once or you can use it a bunch of times. They might give you the combine right there. They'd give you those shapes probably as paper or cardboard, and they would say, put those together and make something. And then complete, they'd give you a piece of paper with multiple shapes, maybe that little box and that little circle, and they would say, draw around those and make something. And then, when they see what you did, they give it a score for how creative it is. So I have some examples. For the top one, use the circle. You might draw a chain. That would be scored as less creative. What would be scored as more creative would be if you took the circles and drew Mickey Mouse. For the combine, you might put all those shapes together and make a face. That would be less creative. It would be more creative if you made a king. And then for the complete task, if you just drew a few more lines and made a pot. So you have the pot and then the lid with the two circles. That would be less creative. But more creative would be if you took that and drew a fish going on vacation. So partly what they do with the Torrance test is they'll measure your ability to imagine things. What in the world?
It's not sorry.
Oh, okay. So they'll measure your ability to imagine things. Some of the elements of the Torrance test are not visual, they're actually verbal. So I'm going to ask you, 4 questions that are on the Torrance test, and I want to see what you come up with. So first one, what if you could go anywhere in the world instantly by just snapping your fingers? How would the world be different? As many ways as you can think of that the world would be different if you could just and go anywhere.
There will be no transportation.
Right? No cars, no trains.
Everywhere, there are many kinds of people. Races.
Oh yeah, because you could travel anywhere and meet anybody. I like it.
And in almost everywhere, people speak English.
Everyone would speak one language, probably English.
And people start to eat almost the same things.
Yeah, food would be similar everywhere you go. That's good.
And I can go to other country, distant place to work.
Yeah. I wonder what crime would be like. You could commit a crime and then go anywhere. I wonder what war would be like.
War?
War. Bang, bang. War. Like soldiers. Send them anywhere. Just, yeah. What would it be like to be a parent of a child if your child could just go anywhere?
Okay.
Yeah.
It will be hard work.
Oh, yeah. There'd be nice things. There'd be some scary things, too. Mm-hmm. And we could keep at this for a while. If you were being given the Torrance test, you could just keep thinking possibilities until you just couldn't think of anything else. Here's a second one. This one's weird. You ready for weird? Okay. What if the whole world, was covered with a really thick fog so we couldn't see each other, but the fog only went down almost to the ground so we could see each other's feet? And the only thing you could see of any human being was their feet. How would the world be different?
There will be fewer conversations because we can't see each other.
That's right. Can't see faces. You'd have to show emotions with your feet. How would you do it?
And there would be much more dogs because we can see dogs.
Oh, yes. Dogs. We'd have dogs instead of children. Or we would encourage children to keep crawling.
There would be fewer people who walk outside.
Right. There'd be no reason to go outside, would there?
There would be fewer cars.
Of course. If you couldn't drive, you'd run into each other.
Mm-hmm. And there would be robots that walk on the ground.
Yes.
And carry things.
Yes.
And carry information.
Mm-hmm. Okay, I have a third one. When you were a child, what was your favorite toy to play with? Or a toy that you remember you used to love playing with?
There's a yellow duck.
Okay, ooh, perfect. It's funny because the example they give is of a toy duck. So you kind of stumbled right into it. But here's the question. How could you redesign it or reinvent it to where it would be even more fun than it was? How could you change it to make it better?
I can change it to more big and like when I touch it, it's more like a bird, more like a real bird.
Oh, wow. So you put feathers on it and
yes.
Very nice. Put a little quacker inside it.
Yes.
Very neat. Okay, let's see. Do you your bag right there with the scissors and the pen and the one sitting in front of you on the table? Or actually, do you have a book in your bag? Any kind of book?
I don't have it.
Okay. Okay. We'll do it with the bag then. The bag on the table in front of you that has the scissors in it and the pen. Yeah, that's fine. Okay. What could you do with that other than keep pens and scissors in it? What are all the different uses for it?
I can put my glasses.
Glasses, sure.
And I can put my accessories.
Sure.
And I can put my snacks.
Mm-hmm.
And
you could maybe tap on the table and make a sound like a drum.
okay.
What else could you do?
I can put air in it and close it
I love it.
and like throw.
Perfect. Like a football. Very neat. All of this is to help us get at the idea of divergent thinking. Because you get a higher score the weirder your answers are. Here's the problem. Creativity, we decided about, 80 years ago, that creativity was divergent thinking. And that model of creativity, people can be trained to do that. So you can take a class to where I've had these weird questions and these weird pictures. You could do a different exercise like this every day and get really good at it. And a lot of companies spend a lot of money to train their workers in creativity because creativity is important, right? So what we're looking at today, there's a professor at Ohio State University named Angus Fletcher, and he says a couple of things. He says, first of all, people who've been trained to be creative this way are not very good at it. They don't invent new things. They don't think up new solutions to problems. If you've been going to the movies lately, you may have noticed all they do is remake old movies. We have a real problem with creativity. And he says, this is completely misguided. And he's got something he points out that when I first heard it, I thought, wow, that's really true. Who's more creative? The adults you know who work in things like the entertainment industry, or small children? You ever see small children playing and, playing make-believe?
Adults and professional adults, because they have knowledge, so they can think of solutions that useful.
Well, what's interesting is on a lot of these tasks, like you ask a small child, what could they do with your bag? Oh, they could talk all day about that. And if you score the kinds of creative things they do when they play make-believe, they beat adults easily. So Angus Fletcher says something is going wrong when we treat creativity like it's making long lists of ideas. That's not what children do. But children are amazingly creative. And so he said there has to be something about how we're thinking about creativity where we're just misguided. And based on what this class, what the name of this class is, what do you think he's going to say the best way to be creative is? What's the name of this class?
This class?
This class, the class you're in right now.
Communication. I don't remember.
Creativity helps you come up with an ending to what? An ending to what? Last week you told me about your first day at TUFS, and that was a what?
Ceremony?
Story.
A story?
This is a class in storytelling.
Okay.
Yeah. And he says, if we want to be creative, what we need to do is stop thinking of creativity as divergent thinking, and really, creativity is telling a story. Because he says that's the model small children follow. When they play make-believe, they make up a story, and their stories get crazy because they're just having fun. So, his method, and he applies it to real, serious, genuine problems. It's got two parts. You, first of all, pay attention to the characters, and then what he would say is you remember how last week we talked about for there to be a story, there has to be a conflict? He would say a better word for that is a story that needs a plot. Now, last week, we said what really small children will do is they'll just list events one after another and not say how they're related to one another. But a plot, that's the relationship between the events, how one event causes the other, how one event complicates the other. That's the plot. So creativity for him, pay attention to the characters and be prepared to twist the plot. Kids very often, when they start to play make-believe, they'll take a character from a TV show or a movie they've seen and they'll pretend to be that character. One of their favorite ways to play make-believe. If they haven't seen TV or movies, have you ever seen small children pretend to be their parents?
Yes.
Yeah, and they see what their parents do and they'll act it out. And they're experimenting to see in their imagination, if I did this, what would my life be like? So he says, what you ought to do with any problem you have that you need to solve creatively, think of the people you have observed who are really good at solving problems, think really hard about what they do, and then imagine they were in your situation. What would they do? So go ahead. Go and write something down. I'm going to put you on the spot here, or I'm going to ask you something with no preparation. Do you have anything going on in your life that you wish you could solve, that you wish you could do differently, and that you're okay talking about?
The best thing is my parents. They deny everything I say.
Oh dear. So do you know anybody, friends, family, or it could even be people you've seen in movies or on television, that you think they would solve this problem really, really well? This wouldn't be a problem for them.
In a Japanese movie, there's a guy who goes trip and don't live in the family's house and goes trip almost all the year. And sometimes he comes back in the family. They get along with the family.
Very nice. This may sound weird, and you might, if you were to take some time and sit back and think about it, you might think of 3 or 4 different people that you could possibly put in your story. But one of the things that Professor Fletcher does, the United States Army has actually hired him to work with commanders, because it's important that military commanders, be creative, because they'll be in a challenging situation and they have to think of what's a way to fight this battle that will be surprising and won't make the same mistakes we made last time. So he has them study other commanders from history, and he'll say, imagine Napoleon was going to fight this battle. What would he do? Imagine Erwin Rommel or Admiral Yamamoto was going to fight this battle. What would they do? And as they think, not just weird ways of doing it, like when we were listing ideas, but when they think of a person and how that person has gifts, but that person also has strategies that they like to use, it lets them have an approach to thinking about their problem that just produces much better results than just trying to list like you're brainstorming. The other thing he says to do, when he says, take the plot and twist it, what kind of unexpected things might happen that might change the whole situation? Like, what could you do in your relationship with your parents that was a positive thing, but it would just change everything?
A positive or
Sure.
negative?
Positive.
So something can change the situation. If I get the job and it's outside of Tokyo,
Sure.
and I go outside, go other place and live,
Okay.
and I meet my parents a couple of times a year,
Right.
it will be more comfortable.
That's funny, and I'm going to get off the subject of creativity for just a minute. For years, at the beginning of the school year, I would give the newly arrived students exactly that advice. I would say to them, don't go home for Christmas. Don't go home for spring break. Go a whole year without seeing your parents face to face. Call them and let them know how you're doing. But next summer, if they haven't seen you for a whole year, they'll suddenly see the adult version of you and you carrying yourself with more confidence, and they'll be used to not being in your life every day, and they'll treat you differently.
Mm-hmm.
And I had students take that advice and say, that really helped. I get along with them better now.
Mm-hmm.
But how this fits in to what Angus Fletcher is saying, let me give you real quick, because my career is that I teach college students. And when I started doing it years ago, I started off with, in my imagination, I knew what college classes had always looked like, so I assumed I was just supposed to do that. Then I thought, 2 or 3 teachers I've had in my life were better than all the others. What would they do? What was it that they did? And then, for a long time, I taught college students, and I would pick a required textbook. I would tell them, read these chapters. We're going to have tests every few weeks. And it was like every other college class they'd ever had. And a lot of them didn't read for class. They would study at the last minute. They got frustrated because their test grades weren't good. I got frustrated because it did not seem like they were learning anything. So I just changed everything. Just took my approach and just changed it. And mostly stopped using textbooks, changed the format of tests that I use, and for a while, they were a little thrown and they said, this is not what anybody else does. But as I talked to them and they talked to me, we started to figure out we don't have to do what everybody else does. We can twist the plot and we can kind of break the game and we can tell a new story. And you may have seen that one of the assignments that we're going to get to in a few weeks is for you to take a story that's happening right now and either retell it or tell it into the future how you want it to go differently from the way it's gone in the past. You had the example we're currently talking about, just your parents, they deny everything. Now, we didn't get very far into the details of that, and only talk about this if you're comfortable talking about it. But what does that mean?
They don't believe that I can do as they think, and if I talk about my for them, it's important that I can get a good job and go to good school and classes in university. And so if I talk about them, they think they don't say I cannot do, but they started to say their opinions, their own opinions.
Right.
And it's sometimes lower than my purpose, lower than my goal.
Right.
And they say that together. So 2 versus 1.
Right.
And I always feel like losing.
I'm sorry. That sounds frustrating. How long, turning into therapy, but how long has this been happening? Has it happened since you were younger or just since you've been in college?
It started when I was 5 or 6 grader because I had to take exam for junior high school.
Right.
And after that, it was there was a next conflict and for university exam. And now I noticed that they denies me. Before that, I thought that it's my fault. But because I noticed it's not.
Right.
And they're also a fault. So I started to ignore them now.
Right. Is that working, ignoring them?
It worked for a few months, but recently they got hysteric. My mother is hysteric. So.
Right.
can you see moments in the past where you wish you had said something or done something differently? Because part of thinking about how to retell the past story is having clear in your mind what the past story was, and then maybe spotting the plot points where there were other possibilities.
I told my father that he denies everything I say, and he understands it a bit.
Right.
And it was something that made me comfortable.
So you had a good talk with him, and he said, "Okay, I kind of see it," and that made you feel better?
Yes, it's not a talk, but I just scolded.
Sure. So you got angry and you spoke up for yourself?
Yes.
Would that work if you did it with your mother?
No.
That may be the thing to get creative about. Who do you know that in your imagination, if they talked to your mother, they would know exactly what to say? And they could be an imaginary person that you've seen in a movie, TV show.
One more time.
Who can you think of, either a human being that you know or a character that in your imagination you can imagine them talking to your mother and they would know exactly what to say and your mother would be okay with it? Is there anybody? It may be hard.
In the movie that I talked about,
Sure.
the Japanese movie,
Sure.
the guy that go trips almost all the year, he's a tender person, and he's so popular from many women. I think he can get along with my mom.
What would he say to her when she said, "My daughter is not being careful, she's not being wise. My daughter has all these lofty ideas that are not realistic"? What would he say to her?
I would say it's not wrong. It's just a milestone to go somewhere better. I think he would say it's okay.
So he would maybe reassure her and try to help her feel less anxious, maybe?
Yes.
That's hard to do, though, when you feel frustrated because she is denying everything you say, right? But what if that was, like, when the two of you are talking and she's saying all these things that she always says? Have you tried that approach, that strategy of saying, "My mom is scared, my mom is anxious, she's worrying about me. I'm going to calm down her worries, and then maybe we can talk"?
No, I haven't tried.
That would be hard, though, wouldn't it? But if you imagine how he would do it, and my point is not to make all your family relationships work, but that is what Angus Fletcher says. When we're trying to be creative about the things we want to improve, we sometimes get stuck because you've had this problem and it hasn't improved at all, and it's been frustrating for you. But what Fletcher says is, if in your imagination you put another person in there, that person is not stuck, and that's where you get new possibilities, and they're better than brainstorming. Because brainstorming, the data we've collected show, brainstorming does not produce better solutions. It doesn't produce better outcomes. But bringing in different characters and changing the plot and trying to think what would happen if really unexpected things happened. Like what? How do you think your mother would take it if you moved away and saw her once a year?
Firstly, I might be more comfortable.
Sure.
And less angry. So a few times a year will be a good idea.
So she would see that you're happy, and that would take care of her feeling anxious, or just, it doesn't matter what she feels, your end of the problem would be solved.
I have no idea.
Sometimes, and it's funny because in about 2 weeks over at Suda, I'm going to start teaching a class on conflict management, and I almost wish we had this conversation in that class because we would talk about a lot more possibilities that fit this example. So it's a good example, but is there anything else going on in your life where you think, this is a problem I'd like to solve, and I'm kind of stuck, and I want to get creative and do something different?
Another example.
Another example.
For me, when I was studying for university exam,
Right.
I just studied for a long time in a day.
Right.
And just sit down and just writing. And so as a result, I started to like hate sitting down and studying for a long time.
Yes.
But in the future, I will have to study someday. So I have to solve this problem.
Ooh, that's a good one. Can you think of anybody that you know, or maybe you've just read about or seen, who is so curious that they love to learn?
Yes. One of my relatives.
One of your what? Relatives.
Relatives.
Okay. What if, when you needed to study something, you thought about, how would this relative of mine feel when they sat down to work on this, and after they worked on it and really learned it and did well in the class, how proud of themselves would they be? And could you almost do a pretend, the way small children do it? I'm going to go do this, and I'm going to make it a pretend game. And I'm going to see if I can't see the situation differently. Because you could say, okay, let me tell you a different area of communication where this happens. There's a problem that we talk about a lot in communication with negative self-talk. So people will say, oh, I can't do math. Math is really hard. I get bad grades in math. I hate math. Or, I can't get up in front of people and give a speech. I'm really scared. I'm terrible at it. I just can't do it. And one of the biggest problems they have is that they say those things to themselves. And if they would stop saying those things to themselves and just try, they'd be better at it than they thought. There's a thing that is being done with small children who have this problem. It sounds weird, but they teach children, okay, pretend you're Spider-Man. Can Spider-Man do math problems? Yes, Spider-Man can do math problems. Okay, next time you want to say, I'm bad at math, I'm terrible at math. Remind yourself you're Spider-Man and say, Spider-Man is good at math. So as weird as this sounds, what they're trying to do, when you say all those, I'm bad at math, I'm bad at giving speeches, I'm bad at this, I'm bad at that, people feel trapped. They know that they've had a hard time succeeding in something in the past. You sat down to study a lot in the past. It felt really bad. You hated it. You didn't feel motivated. Could you put yourself in your imagination into the reality of someone who loves learning and try that?
So I pretend to be that person. Or,
And I would add, just enough to get started. Just enough to sit down and begin working. What's your relative's name who really loves to learn?
name?
Name?
Yamane.
Yamane. So you've got your studying, and you know you have a lot of studying to do. Okay, time to be Yamane. And Yamane looks at all this and says, I'm going to learn. And you just keep going. Because tell me if this is true for you. What I've seen with my students, and it used to be true of me, you just kind of keep pushing it off because the moment of starting is the hardest moment of all. And if you get going, it's actually not that bad. Yeah. So maybe could you take on the character of Yamane and tell yourself the story that studying is actually fun and think about it completely differently. That's another example of the approach to creativity that Angus Fletcher is saying is better than divergent thinking. Because what a lot of creativity experts would say is they would say, okay, come up with 50 different ways to make studying fun. Well, you could eat candy after every page of studying. You could blast music while you study. You could invite your friends over and all laugh at one another as you were all studying. And you could come up with a whole list of ideas. And most of those ideas, the odds that you're going to come up with something really suited to you are not very good. Because this method, the data show that there are real limits to this method. But if you take the situation you're really in and you try to change the characters involved or you try to change what you do, actually, let me ask you that. When you sit down and study, what do you do?
Open the textbook and notebook and try to read the document.
So studying, are you talking just doing the assigned reading for the first time, or are you talking about when you go back?
Okay, so I'm talking about English test, studying for English test.
Sure.
I have to memorize many vocabularies.
Right. So what do you do for memorization?
I just try to read a few pages in a day.
Right.
And sometimes I don't re-study.
Okay. See, the tricky thing with that is the way memories are formed is pretty scientifically well established. So it's almost like it's a problem that creativity can't do a lot about. But the problem of feeling motivated and not hating it, that's the kind of thing that creativity could do something about. What is it about your past experiences that made you hate it so much? Was it just that it made you feel tired? Was it that you didn't get the results you wanted?
When I was doing study for other classes,
Right.
I thought it was boring. It was not in the area that I am good at.
Right.
And I had to read a lot of documents. And I have to have my own opinion.
Right.
But I don't have my opinion because I'm not so interested.
Right. That wouldn't work. I am coming up dry today and trying to take what's going on, the particular problems that you're solving, and trying to apply this method to them. Fletcher is very clear about study how other people think, how other people make decisions, and not just one person, but take 3 or 4 different people. So you mentioned you have one family member who loves to learn. Can you think of anybody, maybe a friend of yours or another fictional person, movie, TV, who just gets excited at discovering new things?
It's one of my friends in fencing club. She's creative, and she always comes up with new ways.
Sure. How would it be different, do you think, your relative and how your relative would look at the schoolwork, and then your friend and how your friend would look at the schoolwork? Do you think if they had to sit down and do that work, they had to do all that English study, do you think they would approach it differently?
Yes.
Okay.
The relative, the Yamane.
Sure.
Will,
Yamane.
will memorize it seriously. Just reading books.
Right.
Just writing down. And I think another friend in the fencing club she will try to study the vocabulary while walking or just running.
Oh, very nice. And that's actually good, because how you form memories is pretty straightforward and scientific, but there are strategies like exercising while you do it that can help. I think we're onto something, because if you then thought of maybe a few other people who have different things that they do while they learn that work well, and you just started not doing what you've done before. You don't just sit down with the books, hating every minute of it, saying this is boring, I don't have an opinion, but you just kind of recreate what you see other people do. And if nothing else, it gets you out of what you did before that didn't work. So this is... Let me see. Just about everything that I have down here, we have talked about. We've talked about the problems with the divergent model. We've talked about pay attention to character, twist the plot. We may wind up finishing a little early today, which is not the end of the world. But what I want you to think about for just a second, Walter Fisher starts off by saying all communication is storytelling. And we talked that first day about how some stories are powerful and some stories are not as good. Because some stories, they're coherent, they have a really believable world. You can listen to the story and kind of get lost in it because it's so believable. And then and the same story might also be high in fidelity. It matches the other stories you hear, and it also is the kind of world you want to live in. And he said that's true of all communication. Now Fletcher comes along and says the best way to be creative is to take the thing that you're currently doing and treat it like a little kid would treat it. Keep living it, but start pretending a little bit. And pretend that you're a different character, and pretend that things happen, and use that as the way that you are creative instead of this spitting out lots of possibilities that we call brainstorming. This is a moment I want us to kind of take at the end of every class meeting. Where are we in understanding what storytelling does?
One more time.
Yeah, that was a really confusing question. Let me try that again. The class in the end, when we get to the end of it, we're going to know a lot about stories and about the telling of stories. So Walter Fisher says all communication is storytelling, and some stories are very coherent and have high fidelity. And then Angus Fletcher comes along and says The way to use your imagination to create new ideas is to tell imaginary stories that started out from the problem you have right now. So what do you think we're learning about what stories do just from these 2 weeks? Because Fisher says, because you are living in a world where everything has a before, middle, and after, and because you're looking at all the people around you and trying to figure out, what do they want, what do they do, how do they fit into my life? That, he says, is why all communication is storytelling. And Fletcher says that because different people solve problems differently, you can pretend to be them and get new ideas. And because solving problems is about cause and effect, and if you try something different you didn't try before, you'll get a different outcome. Are you noticing anything between those? Like what Fisher says and what Fletcher says. I wish their names weren't so similar.
So in Walter Fisher's, it's not important to think about coherence and fidelity, because we can change the characters, we can change the plot,
Sure.
but we are not sure it will be successful.
That's important. You just stumbled upon something very important. Because Fisher very often is talking about how we communicate about real things that have happened. So he's talking about lawyers arguing in court. The accused is guilty and committed the crime. No, my client is innocent. She didn't commit the crime. But Fletcher, he's talking about imaginary stories. So one important difference here is Fisher says everything, including real stories that really happened. And Fletcher is taking a smaller portion of it and saying we can invent stories in our imagination. And that is a way of thinking that produces new possibilities. But for Fletcher, it's all made up. That's why there are no limits. But for Fisher, coherence and fidelity is important, because a lot of the things we talk about when we communicate really happened. When you talk with your parents about what you want to do, Fisher would say you are telling a story. And when they tell you why they think that your story is not good, they're telling their own story. And their story for you doesn't have fidelity. And your story for them probably doesn't have coherence. They probably look at the world you imagine and say, but the world isn't like that. That's good. So we're going to have to remember every week that there's a big difference between the stories you invent in your imagination and when you look at the world as it is and you report on it, but you're still like a reporter, like a journalist, telling a story, but it's a story based on what you've really observed. One thing I want to do real quick is I do not actually remember, or I'm going to do it on here because we're done with this. I do not actually remember what the topic is. And my students today pointed out that next week is a holiday, which I did not know until this morning. But when the class next meets, the topic, come on, cough it up. Move it. Ooh, culture. How is culture passed down through story? How's Japanese culture, American culture, European culture, but not just that. More specifically, how is the culture of organizations handed down through story? And then how is professional culture handed down through stories? How do doctors who are near retirement teach new doctors By telling them stories. And how do you learn the culture of your country, of your workplace, or just of the line of work that you do? And even families have a culture. Well, although we're going to do family storytelling 2 weeks later. I'm looking forward to that. This was one of the ones that got at something really fundamental and basic to all of communication, being creative. And Fletcher kind of is doing it as a work in progress. I think 10 years from now, his method will be a lot more clear than it is now. But next week, I think we're going to have a lot of good examples. Okay, will your heart be broken if we end class after 1 hour? It will be broken?
Yes.
It will be? You're going to be sad?
I have, there's just one
Oh,
question.
ask away. We got time.
Do you have any explanation? Do you have any simple way to explain the difference between the Walter Fisher and the other linguists?
Right. Okay. Angus Fletcher says storytelling is a way to think up new ideas when you need to be creative. And that's the only thing he's interested in.
Okay.
Walter Fisher is saying all communication is telling a story.
Okay. Okay. So, for solving problems,
Yeah.
the former is just coming up with new ideas.
Right.
And the later is for presenting to the other characters or changing plots.
Right.
Mainly communications.
Right.
I
So
understand.
All these things that we talked about at the beginning, we wound up just talking about problem solving. We didn't really talk about how to persuade people or how to make stories funny and meaningful or how to spice relationships up. But for any of those, let's say a relationship. And actually, we can take a few more minutes on this. Can you think of any friends that you've had for a while that honestly the two of you would just have more fun if you would do things you hadn't done before? And it's getting a little boring. And maybe